I'll introduce our guest, Samuel Gbaydee Doe, who most of you know. I mean, Sam has an incredible career, which I can't get into all of right now, but hopefully we'll touch on lots of different aspects of that in our conversation. So just a couple of highlights. Sam is co-founder of the West Africa Network for Peacebuilding and is currently the UNDP Country Director for Sierra Leone. But also, Sam is a long-term friend of IofC and now of our new platform, GAIN. So as I said, I won't waste too much time on introduction because who better to talk about your career than you, Sam? So before we get going, just a little note on how this will work. So I know that a lot of you will have questions for Sam. Just one thing, if everybody can keep on mute so that there's not too much echoing. So I know that a lot of you will have lots of questions for Sam, and there'll definitely be time for that at the end. So if when you think of a question, if you're able to just pop them in the chat and make sure you include your name, then I'll do my best to get to you at the end of the session and give you the floor to go off mute and ask that question for yourself. So Sam, we'll get going by just having a look at the broad sweep of your amazing career. You've worked in all sorts of areas, from grassroots organizations in Sierra Leone, right the way up to global organizations such as UNDP. What I'm really interested in is how those experiences compare and what your reflections would be on the differences between working in those kind of small scale ground up organizations and that kind of top down global organizational approach.
Thank you, Charanpreet. Thank you, colleagues Jedka and the others for giving me an opportunity to have a conversation with the co-scholars and friends of co-scholars through the GAIN initiative. I was a co-scholar 25 long years ago. It's been quite a long time, in 95. And I can recall that going to co, I had to miss 2 weeks of the entire 5 weeks because I was stuck in a civil war in Liberia, and I could not get out in time. And out of other efforts by many persons, I managed to slip away from Liberia and join the co-scholar family in 95. And I came back in 96 until 2006 to teach in the course. So I have a rare opportunity of experiencing core for a number of years. What we learned from core, from the core scholars program and from the experience in core generally, is to create that connection between the personal, as you rightly said, the relational, and the systemic. And that is the same experience I've had the good fortune of having in my professional life. First working on myself, in my encounter with those who suffer civil war in Liberia, in Sierra Leone, and in many parts of Africa, and then Sri Lanka. And what that has taught me as a person in appreciating humanity, in understanding what humanity really stands for. That personal, that groundedness of the individual from your own experience creates the space for you to encounter the other, to build the relational. So unless you have the personal, unless you have some level of equilibrium in your understanding of yourself, it is difficult for you to relate to others, for you to appreciate the other, for you to have empathy for the other. And that relational strength then gives you the lever for you to now encounter the broader system. So really, in terms of comparing them, I will see the sequencing of that you need to have a personal development, a relational growth, then you can be able to have the systemic encounter that comes across. So that's how my work has been, first from working with child soldiers in Liberia for a number of years, then establishing a regional organization for a number of years, and then moving on to the United Nations to engage at the global level.
And I wonder, if you look back throughout some of those highlights from your career, what are some of those personal experiences that have shaped your attitude towards your work, your attitude towards peace building? You're on mute, Sam.
I first came to peace building from the life of working as an economist when I encountered a young child in Liberia who was dying from starvation due to the civil war. And as I've told this story many times to a number of persons, that was my transformative moment. I saw this young child, around 7 years old, under the eave of a school building, skin and bones, if you can imagine what starvation looks like. And I stood over this child and looked at him for quite some time, a couple of minutes. And then I began to ask myself, how many of you today, as I stand over you across this country, who are dying right now? How many of you who have been separated from your families and dying a solitary death? And that moment changed my life. And the story now becomes history. So it's that personal experience of the loss of humanity, the absurdity of violence, the nakedness of violence that I have seen for 14 years in the Civil War, that made me to see that it is important to be intentional with peace. It is important to be intentional with nonviolence. It is important to create a coalition of actors who will understand, who will appreciate, and who will fight for peace. And that's how the journey began. And there are many young people, many older folks across Sri Lanka, across the Democratic Republic of Congo, across South Sudan, many of the countries that I have worked in, that have seen the absurdity of violence and are now beginning to appreciate that peace is important, that non-violence is the hallmark of human civilization. And that is the core that all of us should have together work towards building.
Now, your peace journey began very much with your own personal experiences in Liberia. I wonder what it was like for you then to work in different contexts. I mean, we often see, the difficulties of people working in contexts and communities that are outside of their own, that they perhaps don't fully understand the culture, don't fully understand the community. I wonder if you could reflect on the difference between, oh, there's a really big echo. Sorry about that, guys. That I wonder if you could reflect on the difference between working in that situation where it's your home context and you really fully understand the context, and then working in conflict zones outside of that, such as in Sri Lanka. Is that something that's more challenging when it's working on a conflict that you don't have that personal face-to-face experience with?
Frankly, the working on conflict in which you have personal connection is extremely difficult, because you will have to work at the emotive level. You have to work at the affective level. You can't escape. You can't create a social or a cognitive distance between what you are doing and who you are. So working in Liberia, working in Sierra Leone, working in many countries in the African continent was quite emotionally challenging for me. But at the same time, over the years of creating a sense of understanding and appreciation of humanity more broadly, I also had an effective impact when I work in Sri Lanka. When I came to Sri Lanka, many persons said, "Oh, you're going to work in Southeast Asia, that not many Africans are there. Are you going to relate?" when I came to Sri Lanka, I see the Sri Lankans, especially the Tamil from the south, just like me. We're all dark in complexion. And I met quite a number of other co-scholars in Sri Lanka as well, from the other side, who immediately embraced me. And in few months, I realized that I wasn't a stranger anymore, that I could appreciate the pain of people across Sri Lanka. I could appreciate the fears of people across Sri Lanka. I could appreciate the humanity of those women who were suffering across the north of Sri Lanka. So the most important challenge in this field is that there is no way, it is not that easy for one to engage just at the cognitive level. You have to engage at the affective, at the emotive level. And once there's that connection between the emotion, the emotional, and the cognition, it is a huge burden in terms of burnout, in terms of self-care, in terms of losing self-care. And so over time, it is difficult for you to distinguish, but certainly at the beginning of my career, working in my own context was much more difficult than working outside of my context.
I wonder if we could reflect on that point about self-care for a second, because we're now living in a context where many people who are part of this conversation, if you don't mind just muting, Sam, I think the sound is distorted, thank you. I think we're working at a point in time where many people in this conversation will recognize that feeling of working in conflicts that are intensely personal to them. I mean, as Yitka said, I've been reporting a lot on the Black Lives Matter movement, and at points that's been something that's been very painful to report on racism in a country where I've experienced a lot of racism. I wonder if you have any techniques that you can share with some of us on that younger side of the spectrum in this conversation about those techniques that you use for self-care and that have helped you over the years.
When I came to the field, I was almost your age. I came to the field when I was 21 years old, when I encountered this child. And I came with such passion, such sense of urgency. And I wanted to shout the loudest so that everybody can hear that there is something about humanity that you cannot destroy. And so I was deeply angry when I saw that child die. And that consumed me a lot. So one of the things that one has to do if you work in the field of conflict or work in the field of trauma, as we see across the globe now, you have to first have a sense of centering. You have to understand yourself. What am I angry about? What do I need to see change? What are the realities and the pragmatism that I need to embrace? Where do I need to forgive myself? So there needs to be a constant self-care, self-distancing, self-introspection, self-prayer, self-meditation. It is important, otherwise you will not achieve your goal, because your goal is to transform others, but it has to be transforming yourself, forgiving yourself, appreciating your weaknesses and your strength, your vulnerabilities and your fears. That is important for self-care. So that meditation, that introspection, that looking in the mirror every morning and say, I'm about to step out now. I'm about to confront the evil that I'm determined to fight. But who am I? What are my emptiness? What are my vulnerabilities? And how do I prepare myself? Who do I engage? So having someone to talk to or having the ability to talk to yourself is the first step of self-care. And then as you go out, you step out into the field, you need to step out with a deep well of empathy. Because I got angry all the time when I see stupidity, when I see people being belligerent. I got angry all the time. But I always put myself in the shoes. What if I were in that position? What if I was holding that gun and that gun was my source of livelihood or my source of survival or my existential understanding of my existence? how would I behave? And that empathy creates that emotional and spiritual connection with that other. And it helps both my own centering, and it also helps in the encounter. So that's important. Self-care is absolutely, especially in today's world, self-care is absolutely important if you will have to achieve your goal in this journey.
So if we move neatly on from self-care to self-prayer, I couldn't help but notice a lot of the influences in what you're saying, perhaps because I know from your work that you've been closely involved with the church throughout your career. I wonder how your faith has impacted your work in peace building.
I came to this field strictly from the background of my faith. And there are 4 fundamental values that drive all of my work over the years. The first value is the inviolability of the human person. In my faith, it says that I am the image of God on earth, that I am is the supreme being. Although there are challenges, some say other creatures may be more supreme, but if you look at the universe, the earth as a whole, we would say there is something invaluable, something sovereign about the human person. So that's my first value, that I have no right to destroy the human person, because that is the supreme, that is the sovereign being. I have no right to devalue the human person, whether he has the color of red, the color of black, the color of yellow. There is something fundamental that he or she is a human. That is the first fundamental value that I cherish, and I feel comfortable in the presence of all humans, no matter where they come from. It makes it easier for me to assimilate in cultures, multiple cultures in which I have worked. It makes it easier for me to make friends, because I'm not looking at the otherness in them. I'm looking at the sameness in all of humanity. And I know that human, that's my second value, that human that I'm looking at is endowed with soul. You see, soul is the fundamentum of the human architecture, essentially. It's where our conscience is, it's where our love is where our vision and our imagination of the world is. The human is endowed with soul. So when I'm encountering someone who may be in the space of wrong, in the space of belligerence, I pray to encounter their soul, because they never lie to your soul. One never lies to his soul. That is that image you look in your mirror and you see all of the masks that you are wearing unveiled, and yourself is being portrayed. That portrait of ourself, the soul, the consciousness, is fundamental. So that gives me hope that because our soul is God's, it has the ability to transform. It has the ability to change. And that, for me, is the second value that allows me to appreciate the other. The third important value that I draw from my faith in the work that I do is that sense of community. There is no human that can ever live in isolation. There's that human becomes a person in community, in relationship. And so building community props up the individual, nurtures the individual, creates the anchor for the individual. The connectedness to the other embraces all of humanity. So that helps me. That's the third important value that I always draw on: connecting, relating, becoming part of a network, understanding a family of like-minded people who share the same vision and the same spirit. That is important. And finally, an important part is that human has the ability to create, to change something. We are gods on earth, so we create. We can change our circumstances. We can change our conditions. We can transcend our difficulties. So those 4 principles become my anchor in the work that I do. I have the power to change my condition. In the community, I have a soul. I am an invaluable being.
It really strikes me that one of your grounding kind of foundational principles is this incredible optimism that you have, that, as you say, perhaps stems from faith. I wonder if, just from reading about your career, it struck me that you've seen some atrocities, some real examples of violence and terror. And I wonder how you hold on to that optimism in moments when, for example, you're working with child soldiers, you're trying to apply all of these things that you've learned throughout your career about trauma healing to this completely different framework. I wonder how you hold on to that kind of buoyancy and that sense of self and soul.
Maybe a story will help. You know, when I was working with child soldiers in Liberia, I met so many of them. And there was this story, this young man that I met, and we were engaging and having a conversation with him. And he told me all of the atrocities he committed in the combat during the war. And he began by saying all those things with pride. I listened with empathy and without any sense of judgment, without any sense of discomfort in his presence. Then he looked at me after saying all of that. He said, "But do you think with all that I have done, can I ever be forgiven?" Now, we've never talked about forgiveness. We've never accused him of doing anything wrong. I never said whatever he was explaining, his heroism was evil. But after all that long conversation, something in his soul triggered. And then he asked, "Would I ever be forgiven?" Now, that gives me hope that even though there may be others clouded with fear, the sense of belligerence, and are overwhelmed with the sense of atrocity, but when they leave all of that mask, there's something in their soul that reminds them and that triggers the question, can I be forgiven? It is that humanity that gives me the sense of optimism that ultimately all of this masquerading of heroism and macho culture, beneath that is the soul that is going to one day ask, will I be forgiven? So we live in a world today where there are so many fears and so many individuals who are masking their fears in many different ways. But those individuals every time ask themselves that fundamental question, that centering, that encountering of their soul is always unavoidable. It will happen ultimately. That is what I wait for. That's where my optimism is.
I think that's wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing those inspiring words with us. I just want to remind everybody here that if you have any questions for Sam, please just write them in the chat with your name, and I'll try my best to get to you towards the end. Now, speaking of this community that we have here, Sam, I thought it was really powerful when you were speaking about the inspiration that you have gained throughout your life by creating networks with people. And so I want to draw attention to this network that we have here, an intergenerational network of people who are passionate about making change. And I wonder, Sam, how you think that, given the theme of this year's International Peace Day, Shaping Peace Together, I wonder how you think communities like this can take practical steps forward to work towards peace, given that we are in different countries, in different circumstances, in different conflict contexts? What can we do to make the best of these networks?
When I came to this field, I did not have the platform that all of you have today. At this very moment, as I speak, I'm accessing people from many different countries instantaneously, just now, at this moment. So we have a virtual platform that has really now made even more real our globe as a village. So that is important for you to, no matter where your colleagues are, to sustain your network. When I came from CORE, all of the friends that I made in CORE, and many of them, we kept the connection. We sometimes meet in many different countries. We support one another, and that has helped a lot. So it is important for you to remain connected. That's important. The second thing that I think I would want to share with this community, if you look at our world today, there is something that is sadly missing. I mean, there is no time in my lifetime have we seen a situation where a disease has touched the life of every human person on earth. All 7+ billion of us being touched by this disease. We are all in crisis. It's a turbulent time in the world. In this time, there are 3 big things that are important for us. One is that I've seen and I've heard how many persons who are dying solitarily. In my culture, in many human culture, at the moment of death, you want your families around you. You want your hand to be held. You want that transition to be smooth. But here is a disease in which you die alone, in which you distance from the people you love the most. That affective cognitive dissonance has never happened before with many people in the world. We've seen it here in West Africa during the Ebola crisis, during all of the diseases we've had. But imagine what is happening to all of us. Emotional disconnect at the moment of transition in life. That's huge. In this moment, people need reassurance. People need leadership. And it's quite shocking that in today's world, when leadership is needed the most, that we have a dearth of that. Compassionate leadership. A leader that rises above the turbulence to assure all of us. A leader that gives us hope. And a leader that assures us and gives and communicates effectively to us. The world needs that. And many of you young people in CORE, through the CORE Scholars Program, have that opportunity to evolve leadership, to fill the gap of leadership among your peers and across the world. So that's the challenge I'm posing to you, that network that inspires the growth of leadership among yourselves. So connecting to one another, moving your own space, creating that sense of self-leadership, and mobilizing a much more concerted leadership for our world that needs it so desperately.
Now, of course, Sam, I know that you're a huge advocate for this network yourself, and that you make every effort to meet alumni and to kind of connect with the IofC family wherever you go. I wonder for the younger alumni who are watching today, or who perhaps catch up with this session afterwards, what advice can you give to them specifically, and how can you be their allies in working towards that ultimate aim of global peace?
I know there are many of us alumni of the CORE Scholars that are in many different great positions across the world. I personally make myself available to all of you, share my experience, build the connections that you need, provide the support that you will need as you grow into this field. So I first want to pledge myself as a support to the young network of the co-scholars. And I know many of my colleagues will want to do the same. We had the Code 95 webinar recently organized by JEDCA, and it was amazing how many of our colleagues who are in great positions, who have excelled in many different fields, who are grounded in peace building across the world. They want to be your mentor. If you don't mind, make myself available to also provide any form of mentorship, any form of support that you will need. The world needs you, and the world needs a greater community for peace. No time is being as urgent as it is now to evolve peace, to evolve leadership, to evolve a new world order. And that is in your hands.
Thank you so much for that pledge. I think that's incredibly powerful, and I think that a lot of people will take you up on that offer. So I hope you're ready for a flooded email inbox. I think going on to that point, we should take some of the questions from the floor. And actually, Vasu asked a question that has been on my mind. So Vasu, if you unmute yourself, I'll pass over to you to ask your question in your own words.
Sure. Can you see and hear me? Hey, Sam. Miss you, buddy. Look forward to seeing you sometime soon and have one of our breakfasts. So I think I shared my thought in the text there. I think going through the last 3-4 months with the Black Lives Matter movement, I think it's just struck me that, you know, after 200 years of working to equalize society here, how much we failed. And a lot of that failure lies in that despite the fact that we have all these wonderful laws, that people's hearts haven't changed, right? People's interactions haven't changed, the way that people think haven't changed. So I'm wondering that in an organization like UNDP and in a large organization that I work with, how relationships come to play in the making of policy. Just wanted to give you an opportunity to reflect on that.
Thank you, Vasu. It's really great to see you. Again, I look forward to us meeting up soon. You know, I have been thinking a lot about the question that you have asked, and I'm sorry to say that I'm in the UN. There are certain things we can't say in the UN, but I'm not here as a representative of the UN. But quite frankly, when we equal many of the conversations we've had, there is something we've always talked about that is called societal trauma. Unless a society that has been deeply traumatized historically, unless it is able to confront its societal trauma, the societal trauma becomes incipient. It seeps into their policy, it seeps into their institutions, it seeps into societal order. There are many societies, sadly, that have not confronted their past and assume that they can mask their past with affluence, they can mask their past with all sorts of opulence or all sorts of masks. But you need to confront that past. And it is a universal shame, I'm sorry to say, that in the 21st century, humankind is still wrestling with color. It is a universal shame. With all of what we've achieved as human persons, with all of our prowess in many spheres of our lives, we still haven't been able to resolve that one thing: humanity. And until the societal traumas are confronted and reconciled and embraced, policy and institutions will be dictated by societal trauma. So that is a challenge. And I hope with this new wave or new resurgence of our human vulnerability, orchestrated, designed, perpetuated by our trauma, that we can now say it is about time to confront us and to heal us. It is out of that healed us with policies, institutions that are a manifestation of our new us will emerge. Otherwise, the vicious cycle continues. The universal shame continues.
Thank you so much, Sam. I think that you kind of struck to the heart of one of the things I've been wondering about throughout this conversation, about how we combat those structural issues that we're all facing, how we combat things that seem bigger than us, that seem to be systemic. So I think your answer really, really got to the heart of that. To move from a question about structures to one about hope, I'm going to invite Desire to ask the question that you put in the chat, please.
Yes, thank you very much. Thank you, Sam, for your sharings. Yes, my question is, what is your biggest hope for the world? And how do we have to work towards making this hope a reality one day? Thank you.
Frankly, my hope for the world is in youth. There is a new generation of humans that are transcending borders, that are transcending our fears, that are creating so many beautiful tapestry of our humanity. They are going across borders, they are connecting through the internet, they are disregarding all of those stereotypes that trap us as an older generation. So I see the newness that is coming. And I'm hoping that critical mass of a new generation of humans can be expanded. Whatever way we can expand it, this new generation of course scholars, this new generation of innovators and entrepreneurs across the world. I'm quite excited about our tomorrow, just because I see it in the young generation. And I'm just praying, I'm praying really hard that they will not be dragged in our historical trauma, that they will find it out of themselves and just transcend all of this nonsense and create a new human spirit that is emerging with such excitement. And so that for me is the hope I'm seeing. And I know it is going to come true. We will reach a point of exhaustion where that courage will come to confront that past. And it will be you to redeem humanity. That's my hope.
I wonder if you look back at the past few months, and the situation that we've been in with the pandemic, the situation that we are still in globally, I wonder whether you feel that that gives an opportunity for the type of transformation, youth-driven change that you're talking about, or whether you feel that that has somehow crushed some of those initiatives. Because for myself, I feel conflicted. There are examples where I think that the pandemic has really opened the doors for human ingenuity, for solidarity between different contexts. But then there are other points where I see political failures and where I see people holding on to these values that were damaging before the pandemic. I wonder how your experience has been and what your perspective is.
I share the same perspective, Charanpreet, that you've raised. There are two sides to this. Really, like I was saying, when we had Ebola here, and many of the countries that have had civil wars, if we went to countries that have never experienced this, or have experienced this maybe 50 years ago during war, or 70 years ago during World War II, and many other, it sounds so strange to them. It sounds strange when you say, really, I saw a child die alone. I saw children abandoned. I saw isolation of families. I saw a whole family lose their lives. That was new and strange and awkward. It was like something nobody would ever imagine in some parts of the world. So we have experienced a devastating pandemic, all of us. So as you said, out of this, there is the hope of an emergence of global solidarity. But in the period of moving towards this global solidarity, the fears of this could create nationalism, could create self-preservation. That's natural. That's a natural process. So when I look at it as a natural process, I am hopeful that that ultimate development of this natural process from fear to grief to acceptance, it is likely, most likely could lead to solidarity. But we need to nurture it. So we need to have a conversation alongside the fears, the self-preservation, the sense of nationalism that is emerging, the lack of leadership that we are confronted with. We need to have alongside parallel conversation, a critical mass of people who are steering our healing towards global solidarity. So that is a challenge we have. But if we do not have that intentional pathway driven by actors like yourselves, we could regress into this sense of self-preservation and nationalism and the hate that come out of it. And humanity could lose the opportunity that this pandemic offers, the opportunity to reinforce our humanity, galvanize our solidarity that is already built around the architecture we have, which is this global virtual space.
Now, in the past few months, I've seen a lot of parallels being drawn between the situation that we're facing now and the climate emergency. And when you were speaking just now, I was thinking that we have the opportunity to deal with that situation in both of these ways as well, either through solidarity and compassion or through self-preservation. And so I want to hand over to Kathy to ask her question about this. Kathy, if you could just unmute yourself and then go again.
Of course. Hi, Sam. I care so much about the future in terms of our youth and the environment, what we're giving them. And Charlie, our son, works on water quality. He's been trained to do that. And so I find that inspiring that a lot of young people are taking on the environment. And I just wondered if you see that as a way that we can and must work together. And that could be a real unifying, challenge that we all take on together. And I really wanted to see what you see from Sierra Leone and from Africa on taking on and caring for the environment. Of course, we think of the the problems in Congo and what's happening in the rainforest there. So anyway, there's so many challenges, but you know, I like your optimism, so let it flow. Yeah.
Thank you, Kathy, and it's really good to see you, and to hear about my good friend. Now he's an adult and he's now working on water issues. It's quite time flies, but it's good to hear. Please extend my love to him. As you rightly said, you cannot delink this pandemic from our environmental challenges that we face today. This comes from environmental challenge. And I hope world leaders and some world leaders are connecting these two. Just as we are now confronted with a single virus that has consumed all of our lives, we are likely to encounter many more environmental challenges if we do not work together. We have one planet, although there are many who are hoping they can move on to Mars or somewhere else. But for now, we have one planet. And it is being eroded by our behavior, by our overconsumption of the planet. So I think this could serve as a wake-up call. And I hope young people and ourselves can continue to connect this virus to the environmental challenge. That is a clarion call that needs to happen. If you look at West Africa, there are many challenges, environmental challenges we have. The erosion of the forest in Sierra Leone, where over several acres are lost, even in a day, as trees are being used for many other reasons. So, but the president here and many other African leaders are beginning to see the link between environmental degradation and all of the weather challenges we're now having today. So there is that wake-up call, but that momentum needs to come together. And young people like Charlie and the many others who are now giving this clarion call, we need to continue to support them. Our new and emerging challenge will be our environmental stress. Until we are able to collectively prepare to mitigate the environmental stress, we are in it for many years to come.
We have one representative from the next generation.
Yes.
Hayden, do you have a question?
What can I do to help?
What can I do to help to bring the generations understanding, right?
Yeah.
Ask Sam.
Fantastic.
So he's wondering, he's 12. What can he do? What is his role in bringing generations together?
Thank you. This is a powerful question. What can you do to help? First, we want and we pray that you will help yourself understand what is happening around you. So take some time to understand what is happening around you, with your friends, with your community. That's the first step that you need to take. And then second, engage in conversation with your friends about what you are experiencing around you and why things are happening the way they are happening. Third, ask your parents questions. Ask them the hard questions, tough questions about what you are experiencing, what you are feeling, what your environment looks like, and what they can do about it. And that is the journey. That's the place to start. Questioning the world, not just conforming to it, challenging it with tough questions. That for now is what I pray you can do for us. Harass us with tough questions and challenge us to change our condition and change your condition as well. It is great to see you. I remember when you were all babies.
Thanks. Thank you so much.
I think that is a wonderful and inspiring note to end on. I think that we could go on all afternoon, but we've come to our 1 hour slot. But as Sam said, his email inbox is open. He is an ally to all of us. So for those people whose questions didn't have time to air, please feel free to contact Sam afterwards or contact any of us. But Sam, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to me today, to share so much about your experience, and to make that pledge to continue to help young alumni, young change makers. Thank you.
Thank you to all of you. It's been wonderful. We have a world we need to preserve. We have humanity we need to celebrate. Let's go out there and continue on that path. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Sam. Thank you, Charanpreet. Thank you to all of you who were here today and who accompanied us during these 5 days of great conversations around different topics, different countries, different realities that allow us to connect even more within the network and learning from the work that our alumni is doing in different parts of the world. So we definitely will be following up next week with the videos from this conversation, from the previous sessions, and sharing more insights. And we will continue to work. I want to thank all of the alumni who had been part of this process, the team, Charanpreet, Rohit, Jitka, and all of the people who had made this week possible. Thank you so much. And we will continue to be connected online. Thank you, and have a lovely rest of your day, afternoon, morning, night. Thank you so much.